Hello everyone, this is Venom Geek Media here, and today I'm doing a bit more of a discussion video, asking one of perhaps the biggest questions of Trek, and probably one of the most controversial. Who invented the bird of prey? Now, on the surface, this issue seems pretty easy to understand and easy to resolve, because, well, TOS came first, and in TOS, the Romulans have a bird of prey. We can assume that the Klingon bird of prey is an imitation of a Romulan bird of prey that we then see in Search for Spock. Klingons either stole the bird of prey or copied it. Either way, Romulans originated the bird of prey. That's fine. But then Enterprise comes along, and in Enterprise, both sides have, both the Romulans and the Klingons have birds of prey. Now, the Klingons actually call their bird of prey a bird of prey. Whereas the Romulans, well, we never know what that ship is called. In Star Trek Online, it's called the Tavaro. It's called the bird of prey because it, looks like the TOS bird of prey. But it's not called a bird of prey. So hang on then. Does that mean that the Klingons invented the bird of prey? Well, this is what I'm going to try and answer in this video. So without any further ado, let's get into it. So the first thing to say is that did the Klingons invent the bird of prey in the 22nd century? No. I mean, did they invent the name? Possibly, yeah. The bird of prey is probably a Klingon name. It's probably linguistic. Bearing in mind, Romulan language, Klingon language, both then translated into English. There's going to be some kind of inevitable overlap. So while we call it a bird of prey, they probably have very different words for it that have actually very different roots and meanings. And I think that it helps explain a lot. The differences in the design language and the design philosophy. But also, it means that they're not just all copying each other, which is another, important thing. So in terms of the Klingon bird of prey, it's not really a bird of prey. It's a heavy frigate. It's very different from anything we'll later see. It's very different from even the bird of prey that we see in Search for Spock, and then, of course, through the rest of Burrell. It's very different. It is designed for patrol and hunting. It is designed as a heavy frigate that goes out on its own, is basically more heavily gunned than anything smaller than it, and is still relatively quick enough to get away from any kind of significant capital ship. That's essentially what the 22nd century Klingon bird of prey is. It's got, as you can see, it's festooned with guns. It's got a very mixed armament. It is a mini capital ship. It is, that is really its main kind of task. And that's very different from what we later see birds of prey as. So really, it's only fair to say that the 22nd century bird of prey is just a bird of prey in name only. Like I say, I think it's more to do with linguistic translation than anything else. Okay, now we get to the Tavaro. Now, I've described this previously as a reconnaissance frigate. It's not as big as some of the Romulan heavy cruisers of the Romulan Earth War. Of course, they're not everyone's cup of tea, but I like them. But they're bigger than some. It's a sort of a real mid-sized ship. It has advanced stealth capabilities in the form of the sensor screen. It seems to have a relatively close-up firepower. That's less to do with specific design and more just Romulan weapons of the day. Basically, Romulan weapons in the 22nd century seem to be limited to fusion missiles and a forced plasma beam. And the Tavaro seems only big enough to carry one or the other, and it goes for the forced plasma beam because it has the ability to get in close because of its relatively good speed and its stealth technology. They're relatively few in number. They're not the most common ship of the Romulan Earth War. They are a sort of an elite ship, much like the NX class. But it really is the closest to the bird of prey concept. Like I say, closest. It's not 100% mapping onto the bird of prey concept. It's not designed for that abrupt ambush and insta-kill. Again, it's much more of a supporting reconnaissance asset. It certainly isn't the main fighting edge of the Romulan fleet in the 22nd century. True birds of prey did not really exist until the 23rd century, and the Klingons didn't really put any stock in the concept, because Klingon starship development went very much down the battlecruiser route. They were far more interested in developing things like the D6 and onto the D7, which were, aggressive battle cruisers that could take on pretty much anything they came up against directly. They could field them in large numbers. The Romulans don't have that same ability, which is what causes them to go down the route of developing the idea of the bird of prey. So we then come to the bird of prey, the Tallis. So really the fundamental concept behind the Tallis is one of stealth combined with firepower. That is really the main design philosophy of the Tallis, is using stealth to get up close to the enemy, avoid most of their firepower, which they can't stand up to, and unleash their primary weapon, which is of course the plasma torpedo. That in itself is an evolution of the forced plasma beam. I'll do maybe a separate arsenal video on the development of Romulan plasma weapons, because it's very distinct and kind of branches off in multiple different directions. But essentially it is a development of that. And the idea is obviously to get up close to the target and engage it with this heavy weapon, this plasma torpedo. And that will result in an instant kill, one-shot kill, which is very different to the Klingon philosophy of slugging it out. None of even the 22nd century Klingon bird of prey was not designed for a insta-kill. The closest Klingon ship to that in the 22nd century was the D4. But even then, that was not really. The Romulan philosophy of stealth, a rapid, clean kill, a one-shot, one-kill basis, is unique to them, and it was born out of their experiences in the Romulan Earth War, where they didn't enjoy getting into these stand-up slugfests. So really it is fair to say that the Tallis invents the concept of a bird of prey. But that being said, the definition did not stay static, and the Romulans would basically widespread adopt the concept. Every ship after the Tallis is basically called a bird of prey, varying in size. So everything down from a Wings of Vengeance, which is a much lighter sort of escort. It's what would be described as a Sparivarius. It's a light defensive ship designed really to just intercept enemy vessels and turn them back, operate in sort of small wolf packs and skirmish, to the Winged Defender, which is a much larger hunter-killer. They're all birds of prey, because they all operate on the same fundamental premise, which is of using stealth and powerful weapons. They just vary somewhat in their execution and their specialization, and we can kind of get into that with future ship chats on the specific different birds of prey. It's absolutely clear that the Romulans invent the concept, and then the Klingons kind of copy it in the Burrell, but not really. So the Klingons want in on this bird of prey thing. It's clearly all the rage. So there's a joint design program. So, as I've discussed before, they have very different philosophies when approaching this design process. The Romulans want a bird of prey that is going to be the primary weapon, that is going to go out there and kill enemy starships in very few shots, in a single volley, effectively, in order to minimize the risks to themselves and sort of, maximize the destructive potential. The Klingons don't really want that. They don't really care about that. They've got Katinga battlecruisers. they don't really care about having something that can take on and destroy enemy capital ships. They already have that in the Katinga. That's fine, and that can do that job. What the Klingons want is really a support asset, something that can do reconnaissance, raiding, and harassing the enemy. And so this is why you kind of get ultimately a split. The program fails. It's unclear whether this was because of the Battle of Klaktikel Brucht, or in around about 2271, which basically, brought an end to that alliance, or if it was going to fall apart anyway because of the different design philosophies and desires. They couldn't really create a joint design that they could both agree on. So the Romulans go and develop, like I say, a family of birds of prey, divided into Sparivarius, which are lighter, more skirmish kind of ships, but still very reliant on stealth, ambush tactics, but they are more designed to operate in groups. They're a little bit closer to what the Klingons wanted, although much shorter range. And the Accipiters, which are larger, more powerful, designed to take on enemy starships one-on-one, or at least ambush an enemy ship one-on-one, not necessarily stand there to get shot. So the Romulans developed basically two separate strains of bird of prey to an extent, but they're still based on that same concept. And the Klingons developed the Burrell, which is much more in that raiding support role, which is there to, ultimately enhance the capabilities of their battle cruisers. That's really what the bird of prey is there to do. It does have the options of ambush attack, but it's not nearly as heavily emphasized. Romulan ships really emphasize firepower and stealth. Speed is kind of at the bottom of their list. Some of them are quite quick, but, it varies. The Klingons go for the Burrell, and that really emphasizes speed and stealth. Firepower is more secondary. It has a decent firepower. Its main weapon back in the 23rd century was its torpedoes. That changes to disruptors as the 24th century goes on, and that technology improves. The other thing that the Klingons really start looking at is to increase the size of the Burrell. The incentive to do that, it kind of comes from two sources, and there's two results. One is, during the 24th century, you have Romulan raids. Oftentimes, particularly Accipiters, which are larger and more powerful than the Burrell, and the Burrell doesn't really stand a chance. So the Klingons decide they'll do one bigger, and they build the Cavort, which is partially designed. It's more generalized, it's not specifically specialized for hunting Accipiter-sized birds of prey, but it can definitely do that. The other ship that the Klingons create are the heavy birds of prey, and this is more born out of internal conflicts within the Empire, the Klingon Civil War, in which you work out, if I have a bird of prey here and my opponent has a bird of prey, then the best way for me to get an advantage is to just slightly up armor and upgun my bird of prey. Thus the Norg is born. But this is now taking on a very direct confrontation role. The stealth aspect of the Klingon bird of prey really is increasingly neglected. It's a nice to have, and they will use it, but they don't really use it in the same way in which the Romulans use it. The Romulans rely on their cloaking devices. It is an absolute necessity for their ships. Whereas the Klingons, it's a utility. It's a nice thing to have from time to time, and you use it where you can, but you don't rely everything on it. So going into the 24th century for the Romulans, they kind of dumped the concept during and soon after the Tomed incident, where they realized they were really onto a winner with the Nova class, which is a very large, powerful battleship. And they think if they want to confront the Federation, and also bearing in mind now that the numbers are sort of evening up a little bit, because the Klingons are kind of out of the game a little bit. They don't need to worry about having so many birds of prey, and also the technology to build good, powerful, large battleships is being developed, and so they really start leaning more on the warbird concept rather than the bird of prey, which is very limited. Birds of prey are fundamentally very short-range craft and can only take on very limited mission profiles. A warbird is much larger and is capable of taking on much more open-ended assignments. Now, they do keep birds of prey around as escorts during the Dominion War. They proved vital, but again, that idea of being the main force, the main weapon against enemy starships is long gone by this point. And it really is a dying breed in the Romulan Empire. The Romulans by the 24th century and even into the 25th century, despite the resource scarcity, are very committed to their warbirds, much more so than they are the birds of prey. Now, in fairness, you could argue that the warbird is almost the logical conclusion of the evolution of the bird of prey. That you take all that kind of firepower and stealth, but you factor it into a larger ship that becomes much more well-rounded and much more capable of defending itself and capable of engaging multiple targets. You kind of flip the tables, whereas before you may have wanted a 2-to-1 advantage with birds of prey. Now with a warbird, you're happy with a, let's say, 2-to-1 disadvantage. It's not actually a disadvantage because you've got a warbird, it's huge. So an argument can be made that the bird of prey concept for the Romulans ends up really morphing itself into, or being overtaken by, the warbird concept as its sort of true successor. Now, that means that really, as far as the calling a thing a bird of prey and using it, the Klingons really have the final say. And the Klingons continue to develop it. And it does take on more of that attack ship and raider role used in massed formations in a very conventional way. And the Klingons find great exploit by doing that. But it is a very far cry from what the Romulans had intended the bird of prey to be. But that being said, the Romulans weren't really using birds of prey anymore anyway. So, they perhaps lose the right to dictate what a bird of prey should be. And like I say, the Klingons continue to develop and evolve that kind of concept, the bird of prey concept, into the 25th century. So, really, in conclusion, definitively, the Romulans invented the concept, the idea of a bird of prey. But the Klingons have had the last word. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe. If you enjoyed this video particularly, you can give via super thanks. And I will now thank my members. My Navarks, David Reeves, Jeffrey Ballard, and Tully DT. My commanders, Miami Jules, Mark Philippe, Captain Striker, Bird Monster, Jeff Hallam, Captain's Quarters, Philip Ty, PQSK, Chase Rector, and channel has been deleted. And my Centurions, Julian Arnott, Paul Lash, Adam Bowman, Marcus Hall, BOS Domestic Disputes, Pendlebury, and Nathaniel Mead. Thank you guys for supporting the channel, and I will see you all in the next video.